All
today.
right. Yeah, thank you so much, Sean. So I'm going to go ahead and get my presentation queued up here. All right. Okay, so today we are talking all about how to flip your relationship with marketing to grow your show faster. And this, as somebody who has come from a pure creator background who hated marketing in the past to now somebody who has become a just fanatic about marketing. And actually, I think it's the most creative practice out there. Something that I realized was an important part in my progression of when things started working for me. It was when I started actually enjoying marketing. And like I said, I came from the extreme other end. I played in like metal and hardcore and punk bands where like selling out and marketing were like the dirtiest words imaginable. I wrote poetry, which is like, such a pure art form. I actually still write a little bit of that today as well, and have come full circle to realize like, oh, actually marketing doesn't need to be what we often think it is. And once we can get our heads around that and shift our relationship with it, a lot of good things start opening up. And so today we're going to explore how to do that. So I posted this question on Twitter a while ago, 6 months ago, something like that. And I'd be curious to see, what your gut reaction is when you think of the word marketing. What's the first word that comes to mind when you think of that? And if you want to put that in the chat, I would love to see that. Some of the most common questions that came up, intimidating was one. I've certainly felt that before. Overwhelming was another one. I have also experienced that myself. And exhausting. These were the three most common words that people came up with when prompted with this question. What comes to mind when you think of marketing? And I'm guessing a lot of people here can relate to one or all of those as well. Now, there was actually one other answer that people came up with when to this question. These three words here are kind of all, maybe a little bit more negative. And there was one other one. It's not necessarily a positive word, but the one other word that kept coming up again and again was necessary. And so I think, most of us at this point, over the past 2 years, I think marketing has become something that we've come to realize and accept in podcasting as a necessary part of the process. And so we have this kind of conflicted relationship where we don't like marketing. It feels overwhelming and intimidating and time consuming and expensive, and we don't really want to do it, but we also know that we need to do it. And this is just, kind of one of the inner conflicts of every creative person ever. And so we kind of know that, podcasts do not grow themselves. There's no inbuilt discoverability, and, that might one day come. But, one of the things I think about is there is built-in discoverability in YouTube, and look how competitive that is. I was just reading a stat earlier today that 3% of YouTube channels account for 90% of the downloads. So even if discoverability comes to podcasting, I don't think most of us are actually going to be better off because of that, because then we have to game the algorithm and play the same game we're playing on social media that we probably don't want to play, the same game that people have to play on YouTube. And I don't know that that is really, the savior that a lot of us might think it might be. And so I think at the end of the day, we need to take control of our marketing. And, if we are able to become confident in it and develop a marketing strategy and a marketing practice that is not overly time consuming, but is also something that we actually feel energized by, that might even be fun, I think that's when all the really good stuff starts to happen. And hopefully, the fact that this happened to me, coming from the extreme end of the spectrum to the other extreme end of the spectrum, is hopefully indicative that this can happen for more creators. And today we're going to talk about 3 hurdles, I think, that keep us from really embracing marketing. We kind of keep it at arm's length. And so we need to overcome these things if we want to shift that relationship with marketing. And so I think there are 3 things that we need to do. And so the first one is we need to make it clear. We need to understand what actually, when we're talking about marketing, this is just a vast topic that there are, near infinite subtopics beneath marketing. So when somebody says like, oh, you need to do marketing, that's not helpful at all. Like there are so many things that could mean to so many different types of creators and shows and businesses and all this stuff. Like marketing is not really a helpful word when we say we need to do marketing. And so first we need to get clear on like, okay, what does it actually mean for a podcast creator who wants to grow their show? When we say we need to do marketing, what does that even mean? The second one is we need to make it a priority. And we're going to talk about this coming up in the presentation here, where usually marketing and growth kind of gets shunted to the back seat and we don't really spend much time on it. And then we're kind of, surprised or wondering why we're not growing, but we haven't really put any attention or focus on it. And then the last one, the thing I kind of hinted at here, is that we need to find a way to make it fun. And this is something that is entirely possible. And hopefully through the course of this presentation, I'm going to give you some ideas on how to start thinking about that. And ultimately, with these 3 things in place, starting to shift your kind of perception about marketing and kind of maybe some of the preconceptions that you have about it and why maybe you can't really do it well, because I think we can all do it well. especially as creative people. I think we are actually the best suited people to be able to do marketing well. Okay, so before we get into everything, a little bit about me. My name is Jeremy Enns. You might have got that already from the presentation title. I am originally from Vancouver, Canada, but have been doing the nomad travel thing for the past 6.5 years or so now. So I'm currently in Montenegro. I am the founder of Podcast Marketing Academy, which is a course and coaching program really aimed at more business owners, but we've had people from every type of podcast come through. And really, the focus is really helping people get their first 1,000 listeners. And then we have some other programs for helping them scale beyond that. But really, like, marketing focused for experienced podcasters. We don't talk about launching, don't talk about monetization, really. It's about growth and marketing, and really going deep on that and helping people level up to the point where they, hopefully the same goal as this presentation here, becoming confident and kind of enjoying the marketing side of things, which most of us don't start out doing that. I also write 2 newsletters. Let me know if you subscribe to either of these, Scrappy Podcasting and Creative Wayfinding. And I always feel like it's nice to get to know a little bit about somebody, what they're like a nerd about. And so a few of the things that I'm a nerd about, Star Wars for sure. That's probably my biggest fandom. Disc golf, another nerdy kind of pursuit here. Cycle touring. I mentioned that I used to play in bands, hardcore and pop punk music, and walking. Feels like a kind of boring thing to be a nerd about, and it is. But I will tell you, I am addicted to my 10,000 steps a day, and I'm at 9,000, 8,500 at the end of the day. I'll spend 30 minutes just walking circles around the living room without a thought, and I'm a bit of an addict when it comes to walking. Okay, so that's a bit about me. Let's get into how we can start to shift our relationship with marketing. So that first step is make it clear. And I don't know if anybody can relate to this, but I think that this is what, marketing, the idea of marketing often feels like. It's this kind of just loosely defined amorphous blob. We can't really get our hands around it. We don't really know what it is. We're kind of just not sure what our end destination is. We're like, okay, well, I want to grow my podcast, I guess. What are the steps? How do I even, all these things, I'm hearing all these terms, I don't know what they mean. And so we're kind of just, wandering around in the wilderness trying to figure out okay, marketing, what does this mean and how do I do it? And like I mentioned before, one of the reasons for this is that marketing is actually just too big to say you need to do marketing. There are so many different types of marketing that apply to so many different situations. And so we need to bring a lot more clarity to this if we want to make it work for us. And so what I found really helpful, I kind of stumbled onto this myself a few years ago when I was doing kind of a marketing audit of my own creative work. And I was wondering why I wasn't really getting the results that I was hoping for. And I was actually spending a lot of time on marketing then. And I did an audit of everything I was doing, and I quickly found out why. And what I realized is I started categorizing all the different things that I was doing related to marketing and came up with something that looked a lot more like this. So it's more clearly defined. There's boundaries. There's kind of 4 categories here that I realized every creator and every business kinds of needs to address these 4 things with their marketing if their marketing is going to work. And they need to address all 4 of these things. And a lot of times one task only, works toward one category. And a lot of times, what I was doing when I first stumbled across this was I was basically spending all of my marketing effort in one category and neglecting the other 3. So these categories are exposure, attraction, retention, and monetization or revenue, or however you think about that. And so I call this the EARS framework, which is, kind of it applies to podcasting. EARS, I was a little cheeky with the dollar signs, I know, but I think it works. And essentially, if we do this once, if we can go around the circle, it just picks up speed. It becomes kind of a flywheel where if we can get everything in place, it just works better and better and better. Where if we can bring in a new person who doesn't know us, get them into our show, our email list, our business, whatever it is, and then, keep them there, we earn money from them. And then we get to put that money back into the system and do that more and more and more. And we get to keep doing what it is that we're doing. And whether or not you have a business tied to your show, or you're just doing this as a hobby, I would say that, 90%, maybe 95% of the podcasters I talk to, even if it's a hobby, would like to have some income. This is somewhat of the optional step here, but I think most people would love to make $500 a month, to even if that's just to hire someone to edit the show or to put a little spend into marketing or something like that, or advertising, whatever it might be. So I think a lot of people, if the option was on the table for monetization, would gladly take that. And the more you can, bring in from your podcast, the more you get to put it back into making your marketing and your show better. And the flywheel keeps turning and things keep growing. So let's look a little bit closer at each of these categories. So exposure, this is really how you get in front of new people. And so this is the kind of the key term here is new people who are not yet aware of you. And so I don't know if anyone can relate to this, but usually when I ask people what they're doing to grow their show, they say two things. They always say the same thing. They say, well, I post every new episode on social media, and I'm also on all the podcast listening apps. And then I'll kind of wait a little bit just to see if there's a third thing coming. And it's okay. No, those are the two things. And I think most of us, we have been sold this kind of idea that social media is this cure-all to our marketing troubles, that we, publish our show out there and somehow people will find it. And I, for many years, bought into this as well. I remember recording my first album and putting it up on social media. I created a Facebook page for my band at the time, a solo project. And I was like, okay, now what happens? I put it out here and people will find it, right? And probably you can all relate. Nobody found it. My mom liked the page. I think it was even worse than that. It wasn't just my mom. It was my aunts and uncles and grandparents liked the page. And that was basically it. And I was like, oh, social media marketing is not just putting this out there. Okay, interesting. I guess I'm going to need to try something else. And I actually didn't try something else because I was like, well, I don't know what to do besides that. And this is really what social media, for most of us, how most podcasters use social media. It's publishing stuff to our existing followers, which means these people are already aware of us. They already know the show exists, and they've either chosen to listen to it or not. And, maybe we might wear those people down one day, and they might eventually become, and that's part of the game of social media. But for the most part, when we're thinking about social media as our sole way of getting in front of people, that is generally not working unless we are creating content for the algorithms that are boosting it to people beyond our existing followers. Social media is not bringing us new people in most cases. And so there are many other ways to do that. I know collaborations, could be advertising, cross promotions, all these types of things are ways to get in front of new audiences, but usually social media is not. But at some point, we need to find a way to get ourselves to new audiences who don't yet know about us if we want to grow our show. And so without consistent exposure, we don't really have any potential for growth. The second category is attraction. And so this is essentially how you attract people to subscribe to your content ecosystem. And so that could certainly be your podcast. It could also be your email list. It could be following you on your social account. So maybe you are playing that social media game where you're really trying to work the algorithm and get your posts seen by more people than your existing followers. When they see your profile, is that set up in a way that encourages them to follow you, that it's clear what the value you're going to give them, and that if they are one of your ideal audience members, you're a good person to follow for more advice. And so this kind of plays out across all of these platforms: podcast, email lists, social accounts, really everywhere. We need to make sure that we are attracting the right people to us. And so they come across us and they see immediately within 3 seconds, they're like, oh, this looks interesting. This looks like it was made for me. And a lot of times this is not where we start out with our shows. And so some of the elements that play a role in this, it's going to be your messaging, your your packaging of your show, your cover art, title, all of that, and then as well as a compelling show concept or premise. And so you see some shows just have this insanely juicy, hooky premise where you just see the title and you're like, oh, I want to listen to that show. The one that there's a couple that come to mind. I'll actually give you one YouTube, one podcast, and one newsletter. And so the YouTube channel is Hot Ones. I don't know if anybody's come across this, but essentially it's an interview show where the host interviews celebrities, which is, an overdone kind of genre of interview. Except for each question, there's 5 questions, and each one, they both eat a progressively hotter hot wing, and it's all filmed. And so by the end, they're usually the host, Sean, he's super cool about all even the hottest hot wings. But the guests are just rolling on the floor with the heat from the hot wings. And you hear that and you're like, wow, that is a really original, interesting show. On the podcast front, there are many super hooky podcasts as well. The one that just always, I can't get it out of my mind as such a good premise is Sex Talk with My Mom, which you hear that and you're like, oh, that is so awkwardly juicy. I don't know if I want to listen or turn away, but it stands out immediately. And it's a comedy podcast, but the premise is amazing. And then a newsletter, a friend of mine, she just started a newsletter called Growth in Reverse. And essentially every newsletter, she breaks down how one newsletter writer got to 50,000 subscribers. And she does 40 hours of research on each newsletter and breaks down exactly what they did to get there. And you hear that and you're like, if you're a newsletter writer, you're like, wow, that is so valuable. She's done all this work for me. I want to get that. And so these are some examples of really hooky premises or concepts. And the more you have that, that's where you get a really show with a strong attraction. And so as you start to just look at shows out there, you'll notice this, and you can start to think about how can I bring more of a hook to my own show in the way I frame it. Okay, so retention, The good news here is that this is where most creators do a fantastic job, because this is really where we want to spend our time. This is really, the core trust building content itself. It's our shows, it's our newsletters, it's our long form content where, probably we spend the vast majority of our time creating this. And this is, like I said, it's what most of us want to do. And so typically we're really strong in this category. And this is not usually one of the weak points. And so it's kind of like, for so many creators, if we can get people into our show, they stick around, we get good feedback, even if it's sometimes hard to come by. But like, we see that, we're not just like getting few listeners in and then we're dropping down to zero. It's like, okay, we've got our steady amount of listeners. Clearly, like, once people listen to it, they're coming back. That's a good sign. We need that. If we don't have this retention category here, we could get 1 million new listeners. We could have a great exposure, great attraction, but our show kind of sucks. We get 1 million new listeners in and none of them ever come back. We're kind of right back where we started. So this is an important category, but the good news is that usually this is our strongest kind of category of this year's framework. Now, the issue here is that I think a lot of us, certainly myself included, as a both podcaster and newsletter writer, zero discoverability in either platform, we tend to put a lot of effort into creating these things. And we think if they're good enough, people will find it. But that's not really the point of this category of our marketing. That's the point of the exposure category. And with content platforms like podcasts, like newsletters, and there are others, blogs as well fall into this category. Your content can be amazing, but we need to go find attention elsewhere and then funnel it back to those platforms. And so I kind of think of this as the bucket where we're going out, we're getting attention, we are being active on social media, we're doing podcast guest appearances, we're doing collaborations, maybe we're advertising, we're doing all these things, but we're directing people back to the podcast. And that really get to spend more time with us and become fans first. So that's really the purpose of this category. And so we should stop thinking about this as something that, if we put time here, we're actually going to grow, because we typically won't. And I'll tell you, the first year of writing my newsletter, I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours on it. I did a full year. I actually lost subscribers by not doing any exposure oriented activity. And I published 52 issues and ended up with fewer people than when I started with. I had actually built up a little bit of a list before that. And so that was enough proof for me. That was kind of at that point when I started doing this audit and I realized, doing more of this will only lose me more subscribers and probably not going to gain them. And so that was a bit of a wake-up call. And while it might not always be that bad, email's a little bit worse. You always lose people every time you send an email. So it's a bit frustrating that way. Podcasting isn't quite the same, but they're very similar in how the role that they play in our marketing system and what we can expect from them. And so really the core thing here, this is about like resonance and value. That's what we want to make sure when we're thinking about this retention category of our marketing. We want to make sure we're resonating with the people we want to resonate with, and that we're offering them value, that they get something out of our show, whether it's entertainment or education, or just, there's like the bedtime podcasts where it's like the thing you get out of it is you fall asleep, and that's you're getting value out of it. If you fall asleep, it works and you keep coming back the next night. And so whatever that is, that you're delivering on that promise of value. All right, and then the final category here, revenue, monetization, however you want to think about it. However you monetize your work, there's many different options for many different people. It could be products, services, sponsors, or ads, etc. You could be creating a show to have it acquired. And so this is just much easier when you have those other three components in place as well. And so together, I kind of think of this year's framework, these four categories, as a bridge. And so without any one of these categories, we could have any three out of four, and we still can't get our listeners across the finish line. Our marketing just isn't working. And so because if we have attraction, retention, and monetization, but we have no exposure, we can't get people in. So nothing else matters. If we have exposure, but no attraction, then we get in front of them, but nobody listens to the show. And so kind of like that, like if we're missing any one of these, we really need all four of them in place for our marketing to be effective. And so hopefully this starts to contextualize some of the activities, and you can do an audit. I'll actually share a link. I have a audit tool that I built to help you kind of understand where you might be strong in your marketing, where you might be weak, and what to do. I'll share a little bit more about that at the end. But once you see, marketing in this sense, you can start to see like, I'm doing a lot of time over here and I'm not doing anything over there. I'm going to need to find a solution to that if I want to grow. And so that brings a lot more structure to marketing as a whole. All right, the second one here is to make it a priority. And so I kind of mentioned this, hinted at it a little bit before, but this is another question that I've asked people on Twitter in the past. And I've asked people, how much time do you spend on marketing compared to, producing your show? And a lot of people have said, it's basically less than 10% of the time. If I have, 10 hours a week to put towards my show, it's one or fewer hours that I'm spending on growth oriented tasks. And so things that are going to lead to growth. That is not producing the show. It is typically not repurposing content. I feel like most repurposed content is more for your existing audience. It's not getting in front of new people almost ever. And so people are spending this much time and then they're wondering, well, why isn't my show growing? And when you start to look at it, it's like, oh, well, you take stock of your hours and you realize, well, I'm spending like, 9 hours on production and maintenance and only 1 hour on growth oriented tasks. If that, maybe that could be a pretty good reason. And this is, again, all of these things, I've made all the mistakes and have come out the other side. And I think this is where most of us start. And so if you're feeling that way right now, you are certainly not alone. And hopefully this will help bring some more clarity on how to get past that. And so the reason that this happens, I think, the reason that we typically as creators spend so little time on growth-oriented tasks and so much time on what I think of as maintenance-oriented tasks, the things that are necessary to keep our shows going, actually comes back to Dwight Eisenhower. Believe it or not, he foresaw this, years ago, and he has this quote: "I have two kinds of problems: the urgent and the important. The urgent are not important, and the important are never urgent." And so we're not necessarily sure if he invented this, but based on this quote, there is something called the Eisenhower Matrix. And essentially, it's this 2x2 matrix here. It's got two axes. On the Y, we've got important versus not important. And on the X, we've got urgent versus not urgent. And so essentially, we can plot all of our tasks and the things that we do in our life and around our show somewhere in this spectrum here on this matrix. And so if we look at both the urgent and important category, that's, like a baby crying or a kitchen fire. It's like both important and it needs to be addressed now. In the urgent but not important category, we've got things like interruptions, meetings, phone calls, stuff we have to address now, but it's probably not that important. Not important and not urgent are, watching TV, doom scrolling, most of the stuff that we do when we're procrastinating. We tend to waste, a lot of time here, or enjoy a lot of time here as well. But if we're thinking about, our progressing in our lives in some way, probably most of the stuff that fits into that category is maybe more of the leisure than the, personal development or anything like that. And then in the top category, or the top right here, we've got important but not urgent. And so this might be exercise or education, things that will help improve our lives in the future, but there's no firm deadline. So we tend to say like, well, I'll do it next week, or, that becomes next month, and then that becomes next year. And you realize, well, I still haven't done that thing. I know I should start, working out more, or, whatever it might be. And we tend to these most important things in our lives are very often the things that we actually procrastinate on the most. And so we can apply this to podcasting as well. And so here's how I kind of see this breakdown and where some of the issues are when it comes to why we have a hard time growing our shows. And so in that important and urgent category, this is what I think of as the maintenance tasks. And so, like I said, these are the things that are necessary for the show to keep running. And so we need to have episodes. If we've said, okay, I'm going to produce an episode every Tuesday we need to have an episode to put out there. And of course, if there's no show. If we never produce episodes, there's no show, there's nothing to grow or market or anything like that. So this is certainly both urgent and important. It's necessary. We have deadlines to them, and so they get done. Down in the urgent but not important category, we have things like shiny objects. And so there's, new tools and trends and fads that we see, and we think, oh, well, that's going to be the thing that if I do that thing, that's probably going to grow my show, or it's going to make my show better. I'm going to get a new microphone, get some new software, whatever it is. And we think like, oh, this is the thing that's going to, help me close the gap between my goals and where I am right now. And most of the time, that is not the case. And usually, I've just made a personal rule for myself. If anything looks like sexy and shiny, I know for myself, I said, that's a flag that is the exact opposite thing that I should be focusing on. Because the thing that I should be focusing on is almost the most boring thing that I already know. I've probably known it for months, if not years, and I just haven't got myself to do it because it doesn't feel fun. So that is shiny objects. In the next quadrant here, we've got not urgent, not important. This is what I think of as busy work. And so there's a lot of productivity porn and stuff like that. I'm certainly susceptible to over optimizing my Notion operating system and all this kind of stuff, where I will waste an insane amount of hours doing that instead of doing actual work. And the danger, especially when it comes to work and creative project stuff, is that we can trick ourselves into thinking that it's actually productive, that it's actually moving the needle on moving closer to our goals. And if we're honest with ourselves, it rarely is. And then finally, in that urgent and not, or in that not urgent but important category, we've got growth. And so most of the things that are actually going to lead to growth are important if we want to grow our show. If we don't, well, maybe they're less important, but they're not urgent. There are rarely deadlines to doing anything that is going to require us or allow us to grow. And so if that's reaching out to pitch people to do a collaboration or a cross promotion, there's no deadline on that. There's no deadline, at least until we have done the outreach, talked with them, and set a date for this to happen. But until we get there, there's no deadline. It's easy to say like, oh, well, I didn't get to that this week. It's at the bottom of our to-do list. It keeps getting bumped day to day to day and then week to week because it gets crowded out by everything else. Usually, I mean, in the other three categories. And so, we tend to do a good job. Of course, with the maintenance, we tend to get distracted and start chasing shiny objects. And we like to, take breaks, feel productive, but not really get much done with the busy work. And we kind of leave growth in the dark a lot of times. And so this is just one of the big reasons why we tend not to see that much growth as creators. And so if we want to do that, we need to actually flip this and we need to say, okay, growth is going to be a priority of mine. And usually what I recommend is trying to get to a point where you're spending, 30 to 50% of your total time on your podcast is on growth oriented activities and carving out time for that, every single week. And so I've heard some people even say that you should be spending 80% of your time on growth-oriented activities. And that's always felt a little bit unattainable to me. And so I usually don't recommend that. But I think starting, working your way up, starting if you're at 0 now, how can you get to 5% next week? And, a month from now, get to 10% or 15%. But just like carving away and getting to the point where you're actually spending a significant amount of time on growth. And so, of course, the natural question that emerges from this is going to be, well, how the hell am I supposed to do that? And feel free, substitute, whatever curse word of your choice. Jessica, I imagine you might have a more colorful word to put in there than I put on the slide. But essentially, I think that there are two ways to go about this, to get to this point. So I kind of think about, the time that you have available to spend on your podcast, however long that is. That's 1 hour a week, that's 10 hours a week, that's 40 hours a week. It's kind of this box, and that how we put towards our shows. And so there's really two options here when it comes to prioritizing growth and making time for it. We can grow the box. And so that might be saying, okay, we have 10 hours right now. How can I eliminate time elsewhere in my life so that I have 20 hours? Maybe I'm going to commit and say like, okay, the podcast is a priority for me right now. I'm going to not do a sports team that I'm on, or I'm not going to, see my friends as much as I might like right now in the short term because I'm focusing on the podcast. I think there are, for most of us, ways that we could find additional time to put towards our shows and kind of grow that box so that, if our show takes 10 hours a week to produce and we can't, change that, we could find another 5 hours somewhere by eliminating elsewhere and putting that towards growth-oriented tasks. The second one is to shrink the contents that are already inside the box. And so this is about improving the efficiency of the things that you're already doing when it comes to production and maintenance and admin and all those things that tend to eat up so much time on a weekly basis. And so if we look at kind of 4 ways to improve that efficiency, to shrink the contents of the box, the first one is probably the most effective, is elimination. And so this is something that, as I'm a pretty good procrastinator, I'm pretty good at spending a lot of time on things that don't really matter either. And so this is one of the things where you can sometimes just look at your show or the stuff you do around it and say like, okay, I'm spending a disproportionate amount of time on this task and it is doing hardly anything for me. Like maybe I should just eliminate that. And yeah, maybe my show will be a little bit worse, but I get back 4 hours a week for, just a little bit of a decline in quality. And so for me personally, what I did, I write 2 newsletters. I stopped repurposing content. I stopped caring about it. I don't never post about them on social media at all. And I said, there are way better ways to get in front of new subscribers than posting on social media. And so I'm just not going to worry about that because I don't like doing it and it takes way too much time. And so I'm just going to say like, yep, forget about it. I'm done with that. I'm going to go, elsewhere to find an audience. And so for me, I like showing up on things like this. I like talking on podcasts. I like doing collaborations and cross promotions with other newsletter writers. These are all ways to get in front of new audiences that don't require me to do something that I don't like and that takes a ton of time. And so there are probably things in your show as well that could be vastly reduced or eliminated without having that much of an impact. And one of the things I like to say around this is that sometimes that's a temporary thing. You can say, okay, my ideal version of the show, I do this, but if I do this now, I'm never going to have any time for growth. And so I need to actually cut this out now, focus on growth. And then at some point in the future, maybe my show grows, maybe I'm able to get some income. I can hire a VA and I free up that extra time to then add this back in or something like that. So it doesn't always need to be permanent. The second step here, or option to improve your efficiency and reduce the contents of that box, is around systemization. And so this is just, making standard operating procedures, checklists, was like, I mean, I have become a systems nerd at this point, but was not always that way. And just creating checklists has an amazing effect on both your like mental load of just like having to remember what you need to do each week, even though if you like know it down pat, your brain and onto paper frees up so much more creative space in your brain. And it also, weirdly, I don't know quite how it works, it does save time. And so this is something that now I just make checklists for every single task that is ever a recurring thing that I need to do. I have it in a checklist. I reference that every time, and it saves time, and it also really sets up the next two time saving or efficiency improving steps as well. And so the first one is automation. And so if you have a step-by-step checklist, you can start to look at, okay, well, how can I tie some of these together using tools like Zapier or Make or if this, then that. Some of those tools, like I use Zapier. I don't know, in a given month, I probably save 20 hours through my Zapier automations, things that like, somebody signs up to be a podcast guest and that like auto sends them an email. It adds it to my Notion episode tracking dashboard. It creates the script for the episode. It does all these things that just get set up in the background without me needing to go through and take the 15 or 20 minutes to get all of that set up. And so that's, it takes a little bit of learning on how to do that, but you can save so much time when you learn some of these automation tools. And then of course, other options, I would say Alitu would fall into this category when it comes to an automation tool or using tools that can kind of really streamline a lot of your process. There's AI show notes writing tools like Capshow and Swell and some of these other ones that are coming on the market that can cut a huge amount of time out of your production. And this might be one of those things where, yeah, the show notes are probably going to be worse than if you did them yourself. But if it saves you 3 hours that then you can then put into marketing and growth, maybe that's a worthwhile trade-off. And then the final one here is delegation. So at some point, hiring someone, whether that's a VA or a podcast editor, show notes writer. That was the first person I ever hired because I hated doing show notes, like somebody commented I know before. And so these are kind of 4 ways to kind of shrink the contents of that box, the things that you're already doing, and try and carve away, 15 minutes by 15 minutes until you get to the point where now you've saved yourself, 2 hours a week or 5 hours a week or 10 hours a week or whatever it is. And you can now put that towards activities that are actually going to grow your show. And so really the reality here is the more time you spend on growth, the more you're going to grow. And this is, not something that I think we necessarily always want to hear. But it kind of makes a nice segue into our third and final point here, which is make it fun. And I think that, if we can find a way to make growth and marketing fun, probably we actually want to spend more time on it. And maybe it's even more fun than some of those admin and maintenance tasks. So maybe there's even more incentive then to shrink down what we're already doing on that front to make more time for these things that are a lot more fun for us and actually lead to growth. So on this note, I came across this quote a couple of years ago by a guy I really look up. His name is Kay He. He has a newsletter called Rad Reads, which is awesome. And he has this quote: "It's impossible to compete with someone who genuinely cares and is having fun." And I think about this literally every single day. And I think about like, it in the sense of like, is what I'm doing right now sustainable? Is this energizing? Like, do I want to be doing this for 20 years? And because like, I think, about myself, I think I'm going to be a creative person my whole life. I'm going to be 80 years old and creating things, and I'm probably going to be wanting people to engage with those. So I'm going to be marketing for the next, 40, 50 years of my life. I have to, if I'm going to do that, I have to find a way to make this sustainable and fun, because there is no endpoint. It is just something like marketing is something you always need to do. There's never any one thing where you do it once and it's done. And so this quote kind of keeps me grounded a little bit and thinking about like, okay, do I genuinely care about what I'm doing, and am I having fun doing it? And if I can check both those boxes, I know like, okay, well now success is just inevitable. I just need to put in the time. It might take 2 years, it might take 5 years, it might take 20 years, whatever it is. But eventually I'm going to get there if I can check both of these boxes with what I'm doing in my creative process. So to get to this point where we can start to see marketing as being a bit more fun, I think it helps to start by looking at why marketing is uncomfortable inherently for a lot of us. And I think I've done a lot of thinking about this, and I think the biggest thing is that we are just generally surrounded by terrible marketing. And I think a lot of us, when we think about sleazy marketing, which certainly exists, like not all marketing is sleazy, but sleazy marketing very certainly does exist. We might think about things like used car salesmen. We might think about like the accident and injury lawyer billboards. We might think of like radio ads, just like terrible. And so a lot of the stuff that we notice it because it's bad. And we kind of assume all marketing is that. And it's just because we've noticed it. When really like the best marketing is the stuff that we don't actually even notice. We just realize we know we have an affinity for a brand or a creator, and we don't even think they're marketing to us. And that's what makes it so good. And one of the things that I'll share in the next slide, but I'll kind of just spoil it right now. One of the big transitions for me was realizing that marketing is actually just building relationships. And sometimes that is doing that one-to-one, person to person, making a connection with somebody on Twitter or Instagram, and just like chatting in the comments, going to DMs, and maybe get on a Zoom call, and you get talking about what you're working on, and you tell them about your show, and they're like, oh wow, that sounds really great, I'm going to listen. Like, that's one version of marketing. You can also do that at a larger scale, where you go on a podcast and you talk to 10,000 people maybe, or just 500 people, whatever it is. You're starting a relationship there with them, where it's about connection, and it's about providing value to them, and about like, these are all things. I think about marketing as like, I want to put myself in situations where I get to talk about things I like talking about with other people who also like those things, and it's just making friends. And I think for most of us, that sounds like a lot more approachable version of marketing, and it sounds very different from what we usually think of as marketing, which is loud and obvious and interruptive, with ads that we don't like, that are ill-targeted. And so I think if we can shift that perception around marketing and realize that the only reason we have that perception is because the stuff that breaks through that we associate with marketing is the worst kind of it. That is a helpful kind of mental shift to make when it comes to opening ourselves up to, actually doing this. Because I think, there's a lot of, it reminds me a lot of like money mindset kind of talks, where if you believe that rich people are evil, you are subconsciously never going to let yourself become wealthy in any way. And I think the same thing is with marketing. If you believe all marketing is sleazy and evil, you're not going to let yourself subconsciously, you're not going to let yourself ever, get to the point where you are doing something you think of as marketing. You're going to avoid that. And so I think if we can realize that there are many different types of marketing, and we don't need to do the sleazy ones, we're going to be a lot better off. All right, this is another one I've had myself. A lot of times marketing is uncomfortable when we don't truly believe we have the right product or the right people. And so we have something and we feel kind of guilty sharing it, because we suspect that the people we're marketing it to don't actually want to hear about it. That's a big red flag. And so that could be that we don't have the right audience targeting. And so we need to look elsewhere for who are the people who would genuinely love what we're creating. And when we have that, like, marketing becomes a whole lot easier, because then you're just talking about your show, you're talking about the same topics that you all like. And again, you're in this, like, it's just a party where you're like hanging out with people you like, talking about stuff you all like, and it's a lot more fun. The other situation is you have this audience and you want to create something for them, but you don't really feel like the show is the right thing. They're not really reacting to it well. And so then you might need to look at the show itself and say, like, well, okay, these are the people I want to engage with. This is the audience I want to have. What is the show that would be their absolute favorite in the world, and how do I create that? And once you kind of find that, what I think of as podcast market fit, then, like, marketing becomes a lot more fun. And I think about it a lot. It's essentially like, it's the same as like being in a relationship, where you're in a relationship with a person, and you think you're in love, and then you like meet someone else who's like your soulmate, and you're like, oh, this is what it's supposed to feel like. It just feels easy. And I've experienced the same thing with creative projects, where there's been something that I was really excited about. I created it, but it just really felt hard to market. People didn't really care about it. I couldn't figure out why. And then I've created something else where it's just like, people just get it immediately and want to engage with it. And it's kind of like, oh, this feels really good. I can do this, forever. And so I think getting to that point is really important. The third reason marketing is uncomfortable here is that, we don't really know what it even is, let alone have any sense of mastery over it. And I think we can all relate to, we don't really want to do stuff that we suck at. And so when we aren't any good at marketing, we don't even know what it is. Probably we don't want to do more of it. And so hopefully that initial section there about making it more clear, breaking it into the ears framework, that kind of helps with bringing more clarity to the different tasks that we need to do in order to have an effective marketing system. The other one here, we hate specifically bad marketing, but we might hate marketing ourselves, and we assume our audience does as well. And so we don't want to do it because we don't want to, do to them what we feel people are doing to us. And so again, this goes back to, like, there are multiple ways to market. Not all of them need to be, sleazy. And then the last one, this is an important one, is, and this was another huge one for me, is that we think we need to follow some sort of established roadmap. And we think that there's a right way to market. And really, when you get into marketing, you realize that the most successful marketers are the people who just accept that they don't know anything until they start experimenting and testing. And every show, every product, everything you're going to try to market, like, none of it follows the same roadmap. And so we really need to, figure that out for ourselves. And that can be scary, but it can also be fun, because we realize, oh, I don't have to do that thing that feels unethical or sleazy or uncomfortable, or it's just boring to me, but I can choose to do something else that does feel a lot more aligned with me, and I can make that work for me. And probably if I do find that thing that is aligned with me, it's going to work better than the thing that doesn't feel aligned with me. And so certainly there are infinite ways to market anything. And, with that being said, there is certainly a selection of different methods within, whatever our shows are, every type of marketing practice. Like there's something that each of us, I think, can resonate with and feel good doing. So most of these are just the inverse of what we just talked about. The first one, focus on finding podcast market creator fit. And so the right show for the right people with you as the right host. Like you're the right person to host the show. You're not just doing it because it feels convenient or a good strategy. It's like, this is the show you're committed to. These are the people you're committed to. And this is the show that, is going to be their favorite show. We talked about reframing as marketing as relationship building. That's a huge pivot that I think opens it up to being able to actually approach this in a more kind of generative way. This one, identify people and brands whose marketing you love. Like I think for me, there were a few brands where I realized like I could feel myself just like falling for them kind of after a few like interactions with their brand. And I was like, what is going on here? And I started studying their marketing. I was like, wow, this is like fantastic marketing. And it's just like, it feels so good. Like I want to market like this. And I think when we can identify some of the brands and people we love, we can start to dissect, like, why do we love them? What is it that they're doing that, pulls us in? And when we realize that, we can start to pull some of those things out and incorporate them into our own marketing. Embracing your creativity. I think this is, it's always funny to me that creatives hate marketing because, I certainly did as well, like I said, but now I find it as the most creative practice of all. I get to write, I get to use my photography skills, video editing, podcast editing, web design, like graphic design, like every creative practice like has a home in marketing. And so for me, I'm like, this is like the best sandbox to play with all my creative tools. And not that I need all of them all the time, but that, there's a time and a place for them if I want to use them, and I can like have fun with them. And I can say like, okay, I want to get better at like hand-drawn illustrations or something. Like, how can I use that in my marketing some way? And it's kind of just this like playground. This one, play the long game. This was a huge unlock for me as well, where I used to think marketers were geniuses who could just drum up an audience in 2 weeks, just starting from nothing. Now I realize marketers, like good marketers, they're brands over years at a time. And so I think when you start to think like, okay, there is no way that I'm, likely to get 10,000 people interested in my show in 2 weeks or a month or 6 months, but there's a great chance that I could do it over 2 years. All of a sudden, that's a lot less pressure. And we realize, oh, we're going to use different tactics to do that. And probably we're focusing more on the relationship building. It's going to be slower at the start, but it's going to build over time. And that, for me, that reframe of just saying like, oh, it's not about, if I lengthen my frame of reference here, I can actually feel like, oh, I think I can do that. Where I think a lot of times if you take any task and I say like, could you do this impossible task in, by the end of the day, you would say no. If I said, if I gave you 10,000 years to figure this out, could you do it? And you'd be like, well, yeah, probably in 10,000 years, I could like learn any language. I could, figure out, whatever it is. And so the more time we have, the more likely we are to figure it out. And I think that lengthening that kind of game that we're playing here with our creative work takes a lot of the pressure off and makes it feel a lot more fun. Then the last note here, just follow the fun. When you find something, you only need one thing to work, one listener acquisition channel where you can get listeners and keep them coming back. You don't need to be everywhere. Find one thing that you enjoy that works and double down on that. And then eventually, once you've mastered it, move on to finding something else and adding to that. And so if there's one thing I want you to remember here is that you get to define what your marketing looks like. There is no one right way to do it. You can ignore any piece of marketing advice out there and find something else that will work just as good. And probably if you're ignoring it because it doesn't feel good to you, the other thing is going to work better. And so, treat marketing advice with a grain of salt and focus on, ignoring the stuff that doesn't resonate with you and focusing on the things that do. All right. I had a quick recap slide here, but I think at the top of the hour, we're getting close, I guess, the top of the session, the 3/4 mark of the hour, whatever that phrase is. But I'll include all the slides. I mentioned that I do have an audit for this year's marketing framework. If you want to find that, that's at podcastmarketingacademy.com/audit. And with that, this has been fantastic. And thank you so much for having me.
We've got time for a couple questions. And there's been some really great questions popping up in the Q&A. Some of them that I think you answered throughout. So also another thanks for that as well. But I'll just bring on another great question from Natalie. Should marketing be episode specific or just focus on an overall message of the show? I thought this was really, really interesting. And it's something that I think resonates with a lot of our attendees.
Yeah, that's a great question. I personally, and keep in mind, like I've worked with a lot of people in marketing in different ways, and I also know best what works for me. And so for me, I usually think about it for myself as the whole thing, rather than a specific episode. There are some caveats to that though. So like one growth hack is to talk about things on your show that are trending right now. And like you already know people are interested in this thing. So if we talk about like the Prince Harry book coming out recently, if you were to create an episode about that, I would market that episode super hard, especially around the book launch. And I know a lot of people did. And we're like, I saw somebody's, I don't know if it was TikTok or Instagram Reels, where they were like documented their like waiting in line at the bookshop and then like getting through it, like power reading through it that day so that they could record the episode like the day it came out. And so like they have all this like sub content there that's all around this thing that is trending that people are searching for and looking for. So I think trending topics, like I would very specifically market those episodes. And this is also something that goes into like pitching podcast apps and things like that, where if you like, they're looking for things that are relevant right now. My content, I don't do that because I have a very like long-term evergreen view to my content. I specifically don't create stuff that is timely. Like I want somebody to read it 10 years from now and still feel relevant. So I take a lot of care not to reference things that feel in the moment. And the only time I've done that is with Wordle. I should have I'm a huge nerd about Wordle too. I couldn't resist talking about Wordle last year. So I did write a newsletter on that. But I think like it depends on your show and your goals around it. And I think it also depends on like, if you have a specific episode topic that is relevant, like you might market that quite differently than your show as a whole. And so some shows that are really like, they talk about different topics, so they relate to different communities. Like the through line is not the topic of each episode. And so if we think about something like 99% Invisible or something like that, or maybe another example might be like a music podcast like Song Exploder. That's going to be a better example because there's different musicians. You might, for each episode, go and market in communities around that musician for that episode. And then the next episode, different musician, different genre, you're marketing somewhere else. And so like, that would be kind of how I would think about that. I think like with social media, it would depend on how you're thinking about marketing individual episodes. You know, if you're in Reddit, subreddit, stuff like that related to that episode, that could work. For me, there's always this balance of like my energy of like, what am I getting out of this? If I'm going to spend 5 hours like posting in subreddits and stuff like that, like, you know, what are the chances that this one like blows up? And I mean, to some extent, you have to put in the work to ever give yourself the opportunity for that to happen. But for me, I'm much more of a long-term thinker where I'm like, I'm growing this over years. Like it's not going to be fast, and I'm okay with that. And like, I'm going to do what I can, but you know, it's just going to be that way.
Oh, such great insight. And I think something that continues to come back up is the idea of playing the long game. And that was certainly, we look forward to sharing a little bit more data from the census in terms of how podcasters felt specifically on that phrase. But thank you very much for that insight, Jeremy. We'll do one more question. We've got a really interesting question from Poets and Muses. How do indie podcasts avoid being drowned out by more well-funded marketing campaigns?
Yeah, so this is always an interesting one to me because like the answer is go niche. Like it's the only way. So essentially, I think Ariel might have hinted at this before or said it outright, or else I've just like talked with her enough and listened to enough of her stuff that I know she's talked about this as well. But like a show with a huge budget needs a ton of listeners. And if you need a ton of listeners, you have to be more broad and you can't be as meaningfully specific. And so the answer to that is then like, okay, if there's this huge show that is like, it might be the best production quality, it might be the best storytelling, like good show, like one of the things that kind of frustrates me sometimes in the like indie versus like the branded community or anything like that is like, those are great. They're great content. Like we can like be frustrated that our own content is getting through, but we can't say like the shows aren't great. And so we have to kind of look at like, okay, what makes them great? What can we borrow from that and use for ourselves? And then how can we outmaneuver them? Because we don't need 100,000 listeners to meet our payroll, to like sell ads to meet our payroll. And so we can aim way narrower and, you know, still, you know, and I was talking about this in one of the breakout rooms before, the narrower you aim, the easier it is. You can actually charge way more for advertisers. If you go really, really niche and there's a really, really niche brand, like you could for 1,000 download an episode show. I've had clients, he had 2 sponsors at the same time, each paying $3,000 a month for 1,000 downloads an episode. And so he was kind of joking at the time. He's like, oh, if I get one more sponsor like this, I'm a 6-figure podcaster with only, 1,000 downloads an episode. And the thing was, he just had a super, super niche show, and he had found a couple of super, super niche sponsors who didn't really have much any place else to advertise. And so I think like that's the opportunity, is like big shows need to aim broad, and there's always going to be people within that audience who would prefer something more specifically tailored to them and their tastes. And we as indie creators have the bandwidth to do that because we don't have these huge operating costs or anything like that. And so I think that's usually the way to do it. And the other thing, depending on the show, is that like podcasting is such a personal medium. We usually have a much bigger opportunity to forge a personal connection with our listeners. Whereas like the host of some massive show is probably not engaging with each and every listener who listens to the show. And we can certainly afford to do that a lot of times. And we can be on Reddit or Twitter or Instagram, whatever, and doing AMAs. And like we can show up in these places and be present. We can talk to people in the DMs, and like that, builds over time. And, hopefully we reach a point where we can't actually do it. And we get too many listeners to be able to do that. But certainly at the start, that is an opportunity that's available to us.
Amazing. So thorough on all of your answers, Jeremy. Thank you so much.